We got a whole bunch of comments, and we've also got some artwork from you guys to go over this time. Sometimes we ask questions to fans to have them weigh in. And this guy goes, what was your first Steve Rude comic or artwork that made you a fan? And this guy writes in, Tristan, mine was a cover of Nexus that had him flying face to face against some alternative Nexus. Different costume, cool gloves. It was a painting and has been engraved in my mind. I'm going to have Mr. Producer bring that into the actual screen here to show you the original, which is quite large. So you can give that to me. And here is the painting right here that he's talking about. This is one of the last times I used airbrush because I just didn't like working with an airbrush. It was just a bunch of exercises and futility. And it's the kind of thing where everyone would show you how to do it, and it didn't help. Showing me how it worked just didn't help. So I ended up, this is actually a modification. Some of the stuff I ended up repainting later on when I had more time to really polish it. But that's the painting that he's talking about right there that apparently made a big impression on this guy. So I can do that, right? No problem. This was painted in cell vinyl paint before the poor guys went out of business. Cell vinyl paint is actually the acrylic vinyl type paint that goes on the backs of cells. That's what it was invented for. But a lot of people realized it was a good paint just to paint with. So they ended up just using it as a painting medium, as opposed to watercolor or casein or oil paint. But I've come a long way since then. This is a painting that I totally approve of. But little things about the technique that I go into, like the blending of paint that is not wet, does not stay wet, I've kind of gotten that down a little better. I do a lot of experimentation, and I think that's really the key to staying enthused about our work. Sketchbooks, you know, I've had those forever. I thrive on those. A lot of guys don't carry them, and that's fine. It's all a matter of personal this and that. But having those sketchbooks is like a release from having to be technically proficient or you know, going for a final professional looking thing that goes in the sketchbook. Some of the things are like that, but I try to keep them loose. They're for studying, and that's what I try to use them for. This guy wrote in, oh, this is about the Struz stuff here. One of my favorite artists talking about my favorite artist. Yeah, well, that has to be Struz. Who else could it be, right? And this guy writes in, what a cool and appreciative perspective and approach to teaching. I don't know, I'm not sure if that's me or the way Struz does his stuff. But Struz didn't really teach. He did go up to a couple places and have workshops in some of the Lake Arrowhead places where he used to live. You know, he could command pretty much everyone in the illustration business to go up there and take a shop from him, because he was the best at what he did. He had the most coveted look, and the most superior talent of all the guys that were working in the business. And he invented that technique that we all know and love, which I'll be showing you hopefully in a second here in some close-ups. This is some Sergio. I've been going through your figure drawing book, and it's awesome. I've tried different methods, but yours seems to be make the most sense for me. Copying the lines laid out for the essence has been really eye-opening. They're simple but intentional. So it's easy to build more and more detail for there. Thank you for your knowledge. This book may save me years of frustration. Now, let me see what the essence is. So I'm glad I grabbed this book right here. These are finishes. These are gestures. But the essence is actually comes before everything else. This is what I call the essence. But let's show you something that's actually a moving pose here. This is more like gestures right here. This is the essence. Before all the mannequin lines are put in, there's this, really you start with a single line. This would be a sweep, a big long C curve. This is the same thing, a big long C curve. You can see that in here, and that's why I tend to call these things, I kind of invented a new word for it that I call the essence. So if you had to break a gesture down to something even less filled out than the actual mannequin itself, you would think about the essence. This is kind of the essence right here. This is kind of the essence. They're half mannequin and they're half putting just a couple lines in there that matter. Let me give you a demo of what I'm talking about here, okay? Let's grab some paper. And before we get into showing you some of the recent Return to Earth pages, well, why don't we grab some paper right here. some really unusually looking papers that I usually use for scratch. And let me show you what I consider to be the essence. I need something to work from. What do I have to work from? Let's grab something down here, okay? Okay, we found something in time. This is from a sunbloom right here. Here's what I would consider the essence, okay? Once we tape it down and make this easier for ourselves. You always want to make things easier for yourself, don't you? Yes, you do. So we have this 6B pencil right here. It's a Statler, whatever. You know, it's just a pencil, right? So that's the essence right there, okay? Let me flesh it out a little bit. But that literally is the essence. That's the most minimal way you can ever break down something based on what you're looking at here. Now I'm relying on looking at something so you can see the comparison. But a lot of this other stuff that we do out of our heads, that can be started the same way. Now I'm getting into more of a mannequin thing right here, okay? So it's slowly going from one phase to another. Yeah, so that's basically it right there. Oh, she's going to point her toe a little bit here. We don't want to forget the toe pointing thing. So do you see that? Here, I'm going to put the marks on here so you guys can see it clearly here, okay? So we have the hips this way, the upper body leaning that way, and we have a line that goes all the way through it like this, okay? So do you guys get that? You see the difference between an essence and a mannequin? Essence is a little, you know, the first step to get to a mannequin. So if you get the essence down and you like it, then you can go to the mannequin, okay? I'm glad I did that. That was fairly impromptu right there. This is about Stru. When Stru's first art book came out in 2004, I sent an email through the site, and I didn't expect the man himself, Drew, would reply to me. He said that he made no money from the book. This is a big book that Stru put out of all his work. Can you believe that? Greatest living illustrator, and he ended up losing money off this thing. That's pathetic. Because the publisher went under in 2004. My Stru book came out in a boat from the US to Europe. Took months to arrive, obviously going overseas for printing here, and was wrapped in a big plastic bubble, similar to a potato bag that smelled like mold and humidity. I still have the book in great condition. Bought it in 2004 or 2005, and since it's been replenished by an actual competent publisher who updated it with new work. So there were two books in Stru. There was the first one that was terrible. The images were way too light. They were way too small. This guy did not know how to put the book together. Actually, I think Stru did that himself. And then somebody came along and did it right, and that's the other book, the bigger book, the Ovier book, that features about 70% of what he's done, because there's always more work that you've never seen from these guys that we just haven't, it hasn't come up so far. But with the internet and all these auction places that these works tend to show up on, that's when you can really see the incredible detail in a way so sharp that you're actually like looking at the original. That's one of the things that Heritage Auction does. One of the places that I sell through as well. You know, I don't look up me, I look up Struz and I look up Kirby and other great artists that I love so much. Steve Legg wrote in, our wonderful colorist that did so much great work for the books like on Gormando here. He really knocked himself out here. He goes, I remember when we were working on Nexus, this is my colorist Steve Legg talking here, and you called one day and told me that you just got off the phone with Drew. And Steve Legg was like, holy cow, really? Just one of the greatest to ever do it, taken all too soon, R.I.P. Yes, indeed. Well, Drew was suffering for years. I mean, the last time I saw him was 2017. Having mentioned this in previous videos, it's not hard to tell when somebody's, you know, just getting a little compromised health-wise. I mean, it was pretty obvious. His complexion was bad, always a sure sign. Slurred his words just a little bit, moved a little slower, and that was the Alzheimer's dementia thing creeping up on him. Isn't that wonderful what life does to us? Even more tragic, this was a time when Stru was going to enjoy his life finally. He was retired, but he kept having to get unretired because people kept coming to him for work, which is kind of funny because human nature being what it is. No matter how many times you get something from him, you're going to want more. But his intention was to, once his wife Dylan revamped the studio, you know, spiffed it up a little bit, cleaned some of the wood and polished, give it a little polish. He was just going to do work for himself, but it never happened because of the health issues. Thanks, God, you bastard. This guy says, I love hearing about your time with Drew. I'll wait till next week to hear more about your time with him, which I think I'm kind of doing right now, actually. If we want to talk about pen nibs, the first thing I can tell you is the fallacy about 100-year-old pen nibs. I tried them, and I've been hearing about these old pen nibs as if they're magic and they don't stop working after 30 seconds to a minute or not work at all. And they were so much better than that. Well, in fact, what I found out was that they're no different than the damn things they make today. I think the longest these pen nibs that I've used, in all sorts of, it doesn't matter what the brand name is, if they last a week, I'll be shocked, okay? And that's working with them every day when I'm doing my inking here in Nexus. But this guy writes in helpfully and says, if you're willing to try some more pen nibs, give the Browsy 511, 513, and the Tekikawa T77 nibs a try. They do all the classically tapered lines that I know you like. And this guy says he personally likes the Hunt 108. So you tech guys that don't care about pen nibs, you can go get a sandwich right now, but make sure you come back after this. This is very interesting to me, actually. The Hunt 108 is very flexible, but flexible pens don't seem to hold a lot of ink because they're flexible and the ink gets deposited in huge amounts fast. So you got to dip all the time. He says the problem is it starts great, but soon after some of the lines misalign and they start to skip or close up or not start at all. Well, welcome to that club. And this is one of the valuable services I feel important to pass on to you guys, in that these pen nibs, and honestly it's no fault of their own. I got in touch with the Hunt people, and the guy that I was talking to was very nice. He seemed a little surprised that somebody actually wrote in and made some comments about how the pen nibs could have been improved, but they are what they are, and we just have to spend a lot of money on things that are going to work half as good as they should. This is kind of cool. This is a comment about Stru with the placard that says "My Adventures with Drew," and it's like 14 minutes long. This guy writes in and says, the thing I always noticed about Drew's portraiture is that he gave the characters' actors a slight comic book-like quality, done in a very realistic style. Whenever I see others trying to mimic his style, the first thing I always notice is that they tend to make the characters look too photorealistic. There are good artists who do this style, but often they are simply tracing the portrait with pencils. And I mentioned last time that friends would call up Stru, fellow artists, and they would say, Stru, I'm doing the tracing from the enlarger or the Blopticon or whatever the hell you want to call it, just enlarging the drawing to a pencil state. And this guy calling in, this other artist, had a really hard time coming even close to getting the likeness, even when he blew the stuff up and traced it onto his illustration board. Well, I'm here to tell you there's a great deal of difference between skill levels when someone who does the blowing up of the photo and guys that know how to draw and really aren't quite as good at draftsmanship as a genius like Stru. A few more comments. These live streams are such a great resource. That's good to hear. This one's talking about Flowhard. Flowhard's right here. Let's get a shot of Flowhard so people remember who she is. Flowhard is 14 and has only got a year left to chase the bunnies as she's walking away to get water. Really thoughtful critique, Steve. Encouraging. Thanks for doing that. And then excellent work review. I think he was talking about one of the people I talked about last time for their when I was looking over their artwork. Tristan writes in again. He goes, this was so motivating. You know, your last live stream, and I'm not quite sure exactly what he's referring to because I forget these things pretty fast. Focusing on what I'm doing in the here and now. Although I cringe at the idea of ever sharing my stuff. Now that's hardly uncommon. A lot of people are like that. They guard their private works in their sketchbook or whatever they're working on, and unless it's some really foxy girl, I think they're always going to be shy about turning their work over to other people to get comments on. That's not a problem here. You're pretty safe here. So I love the idea that you guys are going to send in your work. It's only going to help. There'll be no benefits other than helping you out. That's the way I intend to keep it. It really made me want to lock in. I assume that means lock into the idea of showing my work at the idea to most people. See this panel right here? I guess they're talking about the gestures that I've been doing in Return to Earth. Postures of these characters are very expressive. Well, that's the least of it. In this one here, there's already any action going on. In Franz Knoll, someone we're going to be critiquing in a little bit here, said, brilliantly said, I think the most important aspect of art, especially comic book art, now this guy knows his stuff, so you'll want to pay attention to this, is how it conveys the story and the emotions of the panel. You guys hear that? Of course you did. As you said, that is the most often found in the in-between spaces. You guys know what I mean by that? What he means by that? Do you know what I mean by that? Let's move on. Comic book artists must be cinematographers, actors, and set designers. It is those attributes that make for great storytelling, and they are found in the weight of thought found behind the lines. Boy, we got a real philosopher on our hands here. He would have done good with Aristotle back in the Greek days. Maybe he was Aristotle. That's what makes you such a genius? Hardly right, but he's complimenting me. Your art converts so much emotion, so much life, and so much beauty, and so much, pretend it's not me, it's just, you know, a general, pretend we're talking about Jack Kirby, okay? He's a real genius here. So much beauty and so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Your characters are alive, they breathe, they feel, they emote. They're great actors, being directed by a brilliant director on a wonderfully designed set. Anyway, I can't really express it fully enough other than say genius. I truly love your art. Oh, I forgot to mention costume designer. Yeah, comic book artists are definitely a one-man show. We are the conductors of the orchestra, the conductos, as Baby Bear would say. A couple more good ones. You guys ready for these here? Here's a question. This is a tech question about acrylic, so you acrylic types hang around for this one here. How does one approach setting on thicker coats of paint with acrylic? I feel afraid I'm going to lose what's underneath if I go thicker, but I may be missing out on some strength to the painting if I don't. Now, when he says I'm going to lose what's underneath, normally that refers to losing the drawing. Some people set up very specific line drawings that they spray fix before they go into it with paint. As far as I go, my work goes, I always lose the drawing. No matter how careful I am, it just seems to be one of my habits here. That could use a little work, but it always happens, especially when you're oil painting. That's why I don't start with careful line drawings. I start with a big squishy paint stroke, actual paint, and that's, drawing is draftsmanship. You can do it with a pencil or a brush. It doesn't make any difference. So that's a lot of times when I go in with life painting from a real person, it doesn't start with a pencil drawing. In this case, it's always the way my heroes like Sargent and Zorn and Chase started their work, was just taking a brush and kind of generally put in the big shapes and forms, and then from those simple spheres and all that stuff, the real work begins, because then you've got to go in there and locate proportions, and once you locate things, you can start building up the various tones that make up the light effect of that face, whether it's outdoors and the sun is very bright on the light side and dark in the shadow, or indoors, or if you've got a colored light on somebody. These are all things you've got to observe when you're an artist. Thicker coats of paint with acrylic. I say if it feels good, do it. There's something really rewarding about when somebody who's used to painting with a brush takes a big palette knife and smears the paint on. That's fun. So if you haven't tried that, man, go for that, okay? Tell them the dude sent you. So this Tamaz Milwaukee's, he must be from Milwaukee, asks me, do you teach? Well, I like these nice, simple, direct questions here. Do I teach? No, not really. But I will continue to do these things on looking over your work. It's the least I can do on these live streams here as part of what I'm trying to be about. But as far as actual teaching goes, I've upped my price so high, I don't think I'm going to get many takers, but it's literally $10,000 for a weekend. If that's not enough to scare you off, nothing will. But that's only for guys that have bread and are just dead set at learning everything that I can possibly teach them in 3 days, which is fine. Normally this is something where somebody's out of state, maybe out of the country, has to fly in from Europe, of all things, set up his own place to stay, and then the rest is all taken care of by myself. And I teach them everything I know in 3 days. It can be done. This guy's asking an animation question here. So if you wanted to snap action in slow motion, do you hold it longer? The theory behind what he's talking about is if you're going to punch somebody, you don't want to go even like this. Even if it was speeded up, it doesn't work like that. It goes like this. So it accelerates, get to the points, and then it has to withdraw because the motion is so extreme. It has to go back a little bit. And if you're going to end up here, you can pull the fist back to there and not even put it in between here and there. Just go right from here to there, and that's the snap you're going to get that I think he's talking about here. This guy has written in, Tracy Latham, and he says he loves to post. And a very good question here about how to do caricatures. I've recently seen some people do some excellent caricature discussions on YouTube here. They're good, and they explain it well too, of all things. I have drawn caricatures at parties, this Tracy writes in, for decades. And I have always struggled with my visual memory. It would be so handy if I could size someone up and draw a cartoon of them from one good glance. Do you find that it gets easier if you do exercises like this over time? Well, obviously, doing exercises over time is part of what you want to do when you're doing so much repetition. It just becomes so ingrained in your head that it has no choice but to be buried in there and be part of a general part of your greater memory. As far as he or she has struggled with his visual memory. Well, visual memory, I actually have a trick for this, and I saw someone on YouTube recently talking about the same thing that I invented probably 25 years ago when I was still in LA. And I was looking at a truck. I was basing this idea of how to reinforce my memory through a guy named John Gannam, who's one of my favorite illustrators. And John Gannam is a very gestural painter that I just love the way he works. He's looser than most artists, but he gets the same amount of information across. If you talk to any type painter, generally one of the things you'll always hear is, "I wish I could loosen up." Well, apparently they're so locked into how they do things they can't. So that's why they will be envious of people that can be loose. Gannam was one of the ultimate guys that could be loose and extremely photographic at the same time. So imagine someone being able to do that. I'll show some of his work maybe next week, okay? Actually, it's down there. Maybe I can grab it in a second right here, because I have everything at fingertip access. So getting back to this thing I was talking about here, based on the way Gannam would talk about how he would have to remember things when he was out in the open, out in the real world. He had no paper around or whatever. This is how I learned to do it. I'm sure this is very similar to what these other guys were talking about and what Gannam himself would have to do. You look at something, look at it carefully, and memorize it. Close your eyes. How much do you remember? Now, there's going to be holes in there, as I call them, holes in your memory. You go back and if you're remembering exactly what you memorized, but there's going to be certain parts, because it's only the first time you did that, where you're going to be missing parts of, say, the truck that I wanted to paint that day. So you open your eyes again, look at it again, look at it even more carefully, and close your eyes again. And you should, if you're doing this right, and I think it'll work for pretty much everyone, is to see, once you close your eyes the second time, you'll see even more stuff that you didn't quite remember the first time you closed your eyes and tried to memorize stuff. And you keep doing that until the image of that truck in every aspect of it, the highlights, the shadows, the configuration of the truck, the position of the truck, how the tires form ellipses and all this kind of stuff is in your head. And if it's not, you need to look again. You're eventually going to get to that saturation point where you have it all in your head. And believe it or not, once you do that, it actually sticks in your head for a long time. I found that my observances of this exercise would last easily 2 weeks in my head. That's a long time, guys. As far as observing like something like a caricature, that's a science in itself. There's some Disney guys that just live for it. They're just masters at not just, slightly exaggerated and funny exaggerations of somebody's head or body, but I mean extreme. And they still look exactly like the guy. That's a talent that I myself, if I were going to do that, would really have to work at. And I think the way I would do it is in stages. I would I would do my first pass, as they like to call it in animation, and then I would look at the first pass in 5 minutes and say, oh, that's awful, I could do much better. And then you keep going and going and going until you got something that's extreme. And if it still looks like them, you're doing good. If it doesn't, go back and see where you went wrong. The question about burnout. How many of you guys have experienced burnout out there besides me? Well, if you haven't, you probably haven't been under deadlines for too long, or having to be put in a position where you're under a lot of stress to produce things fast. Burnout happens when you work too much. Burnout happens when you don't have a life beyond the drawing board. Burnout happens when you, like one comic book artist I know that died early, never exercised, and lived on a diet of Coke and Bacos. So if you want to do yourself in fast, and not just do yourself in, but also experience burnout on the way there, that's what causes it. You need to back off from your work and give yourself personal time to yourself. One of the ways I did that was go to the library. I don't know if you even have libraries anymore, but when they did, that's where I went. And I would start exploring books that I never really looked up in school, but always had an interest in. And I would end up just combing the aisles looking for books on subjects that I thought was interesting. It got me out of the house, and it got me thinking about something different. The only way burnout happens is too much of a good thing. Take yourself out of that environment. I was afraid of working 9 to 5. I didn't want to turn into one of those 9 to 5 types. So I kept business hours. In spite of the fact that I didn't like the 9 to 5 thing, I kept business hours, and when I got done, I quit. When I worked, I worked. 5 o'clock at night, when the bell hit, or the alarm went off, or whatever the bell tolled for the dude, I would just get up and I would leave. And I did it for a couple months, and it really helped. It took me to a different place in my head that produced genuine work in the way it was intended. It didn't take up my entire day and nights like it seems to do now, but then I'm not under the kind of pressure that I have been in the past. And also I feel that clock ticking, so every day in my case is devoted to my work, but it's not produced under a strain of having to get it done. So that makes a big difference as to avoid burnout. Hopefully that answers the question. So just review what I talked about there. Get yourself a life so you can expand upon who you are, your interests, the people you know, and the interactions you have with others. That's going to obviously be the healthiest thing you can possibly do at this time.